time in your day, whether you're here live or watching the on-demand recording. Delighted to have you here. I will be completely honest. This is a difficult conversation to be having in this environment. I know many people, including probably many on this call, have been affected personally or know someone who may be challenged right now as it relates to funding. And that's not a political statement, that's just the reality. And so, one of the things that I'm hopeful can come from this conversation today, as Melanie said, I want to make it very interactive. I want to share some ideas and perspectives that I hope can be an encouragement to you as you're thinking about ways to diversify funding sources, opportunities to make sure you're able to continue to deliver the kind of impact you desire as an extension professional. And I really want to talk about the human element of the funding system today, which is building relationships and sustaining them, right? My suspicion is that many people here, if not all of you, this is a long game, right? You're in this because you care about the work, you're passionate, you have expertise to bring, and you know that the need continues to be very prevalent with the clients that you serve. And so, I want to give you some ideas, some frameworks to help you move beyond sort of transactional relationships into lasting partnership. And so what we're going to really focus on today is sort of three key areas. First, I want to address, why relationships between people, funders and extension, partners that you may work with to deliver specific work or outcomes for your clients, those kinds of relationships are more valuable than money, which maybe sounds crazy, but I'll try to make the case for why that's so. Next, we're going to talk about how to design systems, frameworks, if you will, that you can make locally relevant to the areas where you work in a way that aligns with whatever administration or specific boxes you always have to check when it comes to seeking out funding, implementing programs, and make this maybe help you create some off-the-shelf tools and resources that you can use again and again so that you're not having to reinvent the wheel every time, so you can really dedicate the time, creativity, and energy to building human connection with organizations and entities that provide funding for the kind of work you do. And then finally, I want to, sort of get vulnerable, right? There are lots of, just ask my wife or my children. I have plenty of personality flaws, and I lack self-awareness in some key areas. And so at any rate, I suspect that's probably true for everyone, right? We all have strengths and we all have areas for improvement. And when it comes to working with other human beings, especially in an era where increasingly activities are being driven by machines in whole or in part, that human-centered nature of what you do is more important than ever. And so finding ways to become better at your bedside manner, finding ways to provide added value to those active funders you have and those you may hope to work with in the future. So those are really the key areas we're going to be addressing today. And again, some of this may seem like a no-brainer or things you've heard before. If so, forgive me. But again, hopefully there are some opportunities to either validate activities you're already engaged in or maybe think a little bit differently and outside of the box. As Melanie mentioned, I'm Nate Burt, founder of Silver Maple Strategies. My background is actually as a journalist. And for the last 8 years, I've been working closely with nonprofit partners, both in the corporate world and now in my marketing agency and consulting firm, really helping executive leaders in nonprofits, extension, universities, et cetera, really dial in their communications, how they show up in the world, so they're able to get increasingly higher levels of funding to give and deliver the kind of impact that they are uniquely suited to deliver. So with that background in mind, excuse me for a moment, just lost my presentation here. Okay, so let me just say first, at the outset, what I am after for each of you is resilience, right? And what I mean by resilience is that you deserve sustained, predictable growth to the degree that you desire that, right? To deliver the kind of impact your clients want and need. Really, that's underpinned by sort of three pillars, right? If you think about resilience as a stool, and to have a resilient mindset, to have a resilient extension office or an extension professional, you really need three core pillars. The first is morale, right? If you don't have the ability to wake up in the morning and get excited about what you're doing, that's not going to come through to the organizations you are seeking funding from, right? In this environment, I can understand and am deeply empathetic of the fact that it may be very difficult right now to have really strong morale. Um, it is my hope that that's not always going to be the case. And it's also my position that at observing the clients that I've served over the years, it is possible to maintain a fiercely positive morale, even in the face of tremendous adversity. And so today's conversation, keep that in the back of your mind, right? The habits and practices I'm going to be talking about today are really designed, yes, to help you get closer to funders, to demonstrate value, to apply for the levels of funding that you seek. But at the end of the day, it starts with you as an individual, right? As an extension professional, as someone who brings unique skills, backgrounds, lived experiences to the table. And again, I want to center you in that the value you've already created, the value you're actively bringing as an extension professional, and use that as fuel, as morale building to that next level of excellence within your role as an extension professional. The second piece is flexibility, right? The systems I'm going to be talking about today are designed to provide flexibility. A problem that I see many leaders in academia and nonprofits struggle with is that there is such a sort of a boom and bust cycle, right? We got the funding, now we're going to implement the program. Oh snap, the funding's about to run out, it's time to go get some more funding. That is a very fragile operational model, and it's not designed for success. So if I can help you think more further ahead, think about building not only grant proposals, but also systems that allow you to cultivate relationships in parallel to those funding proposals. That's going to add stability, sustainability, greater flexibility as circumstances outside of your control change. And then finally, the key pillar here is clarity, right? Understanding what are you uniquely suited to do and what are your goals and objectives. How can you best serve your clients? What resources do you have today and what do you need to serve them at an even higher level, right? What is it going to take? And really helping you pair out the 20% of activities, proposals, etc., that are going to drive 80% of the funds that sustain you, as well as the kind of impact that you want to deliver. And again, there are all kinds of things outside of that add to your success as an extension professional, or really anyone working in your kind of capacity, doing the kind of work you do. But ultimately, if morale, flexibility, and clarity are there, you have a much greater chance at building a resilient mindset and thus sort of imbuing that resilience across everything that you do. And your funders are going to notice that, and it's going to be incredibly valuable to them to see that and continue funding the work that you do. What in the world? Okay. Sorry. I keep clicking in a corner of my screen and then my slides disappear and then I have to call them back. So I apologize. All right. I want to ask you, what is an important relationship in your life? So type in the chat. This could be, you don't have to name names, although you're certainly welcome to, but it could be your spouse. It could be your relationship as a parent, as an extension professional. So drop in the chat, what's a relationship that really matters to you? And maybe if you have an opportunity, a few words about why that relationship matters to you. I promise this is not a trick question. Love it. Melanie, my younger sister, Nicole, fantastic. Sibling relationships are huge. I have 3 of them myself. I am the parent of 4 siblings, and yes, that is awesome. Spouse and kids, Michelle says, the most important relationship. Larissa says, my relationship with God, my husband and children, love that. Tammy, husband and daughters, faith family. Oh, friends in 2nd grade. Gwen, I applaud you. I admire people who keep friendships throughout their lifetime. I have never been good at that, and it's a skill worth cultivating, so thank you. I love this. Spouse, kids, colleagues. Yes, this is perfect. So you all know better than anyone the value of strong relationships, right? The point that I want to stress here is humans make funding decisions, not machines. Now, I know that in the stock market and other aspects and other industries, machines do make decisions rapidly. I would not at all be surprised if AI and machines are more deeply incorporated, perhaps right now or definitely in the future in funding decisions. But that being the case, at the end of the day, there's a person behind the machine. And so the more that you can lean into that human relationship, the more likely you are to have sustained success, right? Because people know you personally, they know your values, they know your areas of expertise, they know the impact you've had in the past, they know what you're capable of in the future. And so that human connection is key in life, and it's certainly key when it comes to funding. The second piece here is that, strong relationships have a compound effect, right? So again, the comment that was made in the chat about your spouse, your faith family, the friend you've had since second grade, like, you cannot replace the value you get from a relationship with someone you've held for 20, 30, 40 years, right? It's just not possible. And so the same can be said for, again, not just focusing on funding opportunities, but starting to think about who are funders themselves as people, right? Some organizations, some funding entities, foundations, et cetera, may be more opaque and may not want that kind of relationship. But my hypothesis for you all to go out and test in the field, and things that I've seen work well in other use cases, is that when you start to build the foundation, add value by sharing your expertise, your knowledge, the creative thinking you're doing, that's going to resonate and create opportunities. The funding may not be there today, but it might be tomorrow if you help sort of sow the seed of possibility, if you build those relationships, have those conversations. And then the last piece, which again should not be overlooked, is that relationships are valuable because they make us feel good, because they lead to maybe faster decisions when it comes to funding. But really, you're building trust, right? You're building relationships between people that, while all of us are flawed, again, demonstrates the depth of character you have, demonstrates the kinds of things you've done in the past, and shows that you're good on your word, right? And so just showing up as a person, sharing insights, asking smart questions, right? All of these things are very human characteristics that a machine can replicate. But again, people have a unique sort of centered role in this space. And so I want to encourage you to acknowledge that, embrace it. No matter what technology does, that piece won't change. And in fact, I would argue it's going to become even more important. So the action step for all of this, if you choose to accept it, is really start thinking about potential organizations, funding entities, either that you've worked with in the past that you've been curious about exploring, and write down what's one step I could do to start personalized outreach. Maybe it's just look up the name of their program officers. Maybe it's look up the name of the executive director or the person who makes funding decisions, or someone who's been funded by that organization before that I need to meet and learn more about what was their experience like, right? You may have no idea where to start. You may not have the first funder name at all. And so in that case, maybe it's just an exercise in starting to do some research, go back and watch some previous sessions we've held this year and last year about how to do research and find examples of foundations or organizations that are aligned with the kind of work you do. Again, take a first step, really, is my bottom line. Think about ways to continue strengthening those relationships and learning. So the next interactive piece here, I want you to think about the best funder you ever worked with. You don't have to name a name, but think about either the people behind the organization, right? Maybe it was a program officer who was your contact. Maybe it was some administrative function, someone in finance, whatever the case might be. Think about the personality traits or professional attributes that made that relationship awesome, and then drop that in the chat, right? It could be one thing, it could be a handful of traits. How do you know when you've stumbled upon a really great extension funder relationship? What does that look like? Ooh, I like that. Okay, so we got some great stuff in the chat here. Carrie says shared purpose. Yes, right? You both have a certain outcome or objective. Gwen says shared mission and vision. There is alignment in how you think about the world, and not only how you think about it, but also, okay, how do we actually make a difference, right? How do we take action? Kelly says she was hands-on, came to meetings with me, asked questions. Yes, I love this. I'll give you an example of what probably I would not recommend. I was talking with with a client recently, and they were explaining about a big grant program. It was a six-figure grant over several years, and they were talking about impact reporting, and we were working together to figure out ways to make their reporting more compelling and really dial it in, especially for an executive audience that maybe doesn't have time to go through 20 pages of notes. And so they said, well, the challenge they were running into is that for this particular funding opportunity, they already had the funds in hand, they were doing the work, but the problem was they were never checking in with the funding entity. And so I said, well, what do you know about like how the funders feeling about this? Like, are things going pretty well? And they're like, well, I got the indication maybe they talk once or twice a year, maybe they exchange an email, but beyond that, it's pretty hands off. And that's fine. I think that's a way to run an organization. That's a way to do business. Everyone's very busy. No one wants another meeting, but it also overlooks the real possibility to build the relationship, to build trust, to share your expertise as an extension professional. And again, this wasn't an extension example. This was someone outside of the extension system. But again, I suspect that probably happens more often than we would care to admit. That it's sort of like we got the funding and now we're on autopilot. We're going to go do the stuff and then we're going to report back on how it went. There is a whole nother layer of human relationship building, of trust building, of sowing the seeds of that next project, that next level of outcome that you can deliver that you're missing out on if you don't engage in that two-way conversation. So yeah, again, I think everyone in this chat is sharing these ideas that really resonate and speak to this idea of relationship, right? Hands-on, asking questions, good listening, and actually co-creating a proposal together. Like that's I love that, Eric. I've worked with funders before to sort of design, like, here's the idea we have, now let's make it better, iterate, right? Take this part out, plug this in. We tried this before, it didn't work great, but maybe if you flipped it on its head this way, that would work even better. Love that. Impact-oriented, shared excitement and enthusiasm. Yes, there is nothing, well, maybe there are a few things worse than going into a meeting with someone who is a wet blanket and like is either a critic outright or is just sort of lukewarm. And you may not always have a choice, right? The person who you initially talk with about funding may not be your daily point of contact, but whenever you can plant the seeds yourself and be proactive and really bring that kind of energy to the table, that will encourage funders to up level on their side and really make sure they're matching that energy. I love that. Thank you for all the great comments. This is super helpful and again, instructive for all of us thinking about just how do we create this kind of energy, this kind of environment for continued funding success that also delivers the high impact that you desire. So, you know, there are definitely lessons we can take from missteps. I mentioned an example a moment ago of just not really having much of a relationship with a funder at all. And again, that's a possibility. It's not a great possibility. And so I want to encourage this group to really think strategically and creatively about little, not even overt, massive time investment kinds of steps, but just little things you could do to listen, to ask questions, to share an occasional update, maybe share an article or a video on something that resonates based on the work you're doing together with that funder. Rushing into collaboration without determining your alignment can create lots of challenges. And so, you may get into a project and you may have had this experience where you're in the middle of a grant implementation and suddenly you realize that what the funder thought you were doing and what you thought you were doing maybe are two different things. So again, early transparent conversations up front and then periodic check-ins along the way. And again, this applies to active funding, certainly, but it can also apply to funding you don't have yet, right? Just establishing a cadence of trust building can really be powerful. Okay, so we talked about the best experiences, right? Everyone loves to talk about great experiences, and we often don't dwell on that piece. What we often dwell on instead is the not so great experiences. So I'm curious, let's paint a really good, clear contrast while we're here together today. What personality traits or attributes make funder relationships difficult? And again, don't name names, please. We don't want to call anybody out here. We just want to try to understand how do we separate the good from the really rough? Because again, what I want to encourage you to do is as you look at this list that's going to be dropping into the chat of challenges that you face with funders, use those as red flags even before you start a relationship, right? So if you notice, specific words in their materials on their website or in their LinkedIn profiles, if you have early conversations and you're getting the hint that maybe this isn't the best fit, listen to your intuition, right? Read the room. And it's not always possible to do that with 100% clarity. But I think when you start to maybe observe what hasn't worked in the past, you can avoid repeating history. So some things I see in the chat about watch outs for funder relationships, denying funds based on arbitrary words. Yes, so there is something to be said for following instructions, right? My wife and I homeschool our kids, and we're both products of public education, which we're huge supporters of. And for our family, it made sense to experiment with homeschooling. And so one of the things we really often struggle with is how strictly do you read the rubric? Like, is all I'm teaching my child to follow the instructions to the letter of the law, or is there something broader, like some key educational takeaways or insights or lessons that are going to serve them well for life? I think the same is completely true for funding, right? If you're being dinged for a whole litany of small little nitpicky things that miss the bigger picture, maybe it wasn't meant to be in the first place, right? So that's a really astute observation that Kitty makes. Gwen says, taking forever to give you input, tons of post-grant administrative guidelines. Yes, like red tape, bureaucracy, not being responsive. Again, within reason, right? We're all busy people, but I think there is something to be said for organizations that value you enough and really see the vision that you've cast to get back to you in a timely way. The worst is for an individual, Larissa says, making me feel they are giving me the funds control. Right, so like I'm doing you a favor, right? So now you're going to basically heed my beck and call. That's not a great way to start a relationship. Eric says, poor communication. Christine, difficult to communicate with. Matt, unclear about goals, either too many or too few folks in the decision-making process. Yeah, so like how many cooks are in the kitchen figuring this thing out? Is it clear like who my primary point of contact is? Am I having to play telephone with everybody? Are we miscommunicating more often than not? Really, really important red flags to watch out for. Hurdles. Yes, unaware of how slowly the university systems work. Yeah, I mean, I won't offer any commentary there because you all live in this world every day. But yes, there are definitely challenges that we face, right, with funders. And then once we have the funding, maybe lack of alignment around these are how our systems work. This is how you're going to work as the funder. And finding a happy medium can be a real struggle. So again, these aren't all necessarily deal breakers, but I would certainly be, I would maybe make a running list or like make a standard operating procedure document that you keep and just reference that, before you even start to apply for funding or before you start to research specific funders as you look to diversify, go through those things, right? That we just copy and paste this Zoom chat into that document and say, look, these are things that I want to look for and prioritize, and these are the things that I really want to avoid. And if I see any of these signs on the bad side, I'm going to ask myself some real questions because you want to avoid a lot of time and heartache, if possible, while you're going through this process of diversifying and building the right relationships versus the first relationship to come through the door. So from my vantage point, working with clients, there are some key early steps I would recommend when it comes to engaging funders or thinking about engaging funders, rather than just sort of, again, going with the first funder to walk in the door. You get an email from a colleague that says, hey, there's this new funding opportunity. What do you think? Should we go for it? Let's dial it back a bit and think through some of these questions and maybe put a framework in place for whether we decide to move forward or not. It's a really good idea, in my opinion, to have documents that you can pull off the shelf demonstrating a few key value propositions that you personally bring as an extension professional and that the entity you serve, whether that's your university or your local extension office or whatever the case might be, the realm in which you work, you want to be able to illustrate that and quickly, clearly for potential funders. And so having some sort of physical printouts or definitely a digital version of this, but customizable cover letters, right? So if you're sending an introduction to a funder for the first time, you're trying to set up just a 15-minute friendly meet and greet, no pressure, no obligation, just want to get to know you better, want to share a little bit about what we do. Having a letter that really summarizes very succinctly your organization, your mission, what extension is for many who may not be aware. could be really helpful. Another thing, like having a place where you file all of your annual impact reports or quarterly reports, maybe visual case studies. Again, ideally, they would be aligned with the kind of programming or projects you would be seeking funding for from a specific funder. But again, just maybe giving an idea of the depth and breadth of the work that Extension does, again, aligned with that funder's priorities, could be really helpful. Other ideas, a project prospectus. Again, I wouldn't jump the gun with starting to share specific projects or making a specific funding ask off the bat unless there's just, no time available to you. But having that in your back pocket as talking points for a conversation where you're starting to sort of socialize a specific idea, or maybe even an opportunity to co-create a proposal together with a funder, have a baseline, right? Know the funding that you're going to need. We talked about this a month or two ago, right? Really laying the groundwork for what do I have today in terms of financial resources and capacity? Who's going to get the work done? What do I need? And then what is that gap, right? I'm approaching funders, presumably in part to fill that gap, and then also to, build sustainability into my extension role for the long term and deliver that extension impact sustainably with my clients. So understanding what that looks like financially, operationally, will be really helpful. And then just some general history and leadership, like who are you? It might be a CV, it might be just a quick bio page, it might be just a document with a link to your extension bio online. But again, having those things available to you, you can then sort of pick and choose and tailor that to the specific funder. Think about ways to make it appealing. I really like the Axios Smart Brevity approach, where you're, having bolded text, brief sentences, concise bullet points, things that really are basically an executive summary, if you will, right? Any way to make what you do immediately relevant and clear to someone you're going to be meeting with in a funding entity is going to really serve you very well. The next thing I want you to do is give yourself some evidence that the time and effort you're investing in cultivating these funder relationships is actually worthwhile. My business coach, Ed Gandia, likes to call this key indicators of progress, right? So when it comes to researching specific funders, doing outreach, sending emails, setting meetings, learning about possible proposals or RFPs that are coming down the road, it feels like a lot of work. I know it does to me. It feels like a lot of time investment for uncertain return on investment, right? There's no guarantee that all of this effort you're putting in is going to result in a funded project. There's no guarantee that the funder is going to meet with you. But from experience, I would say that the more volume you have, right, the more outreach you're doing that's very much targeted to your purpose, the outcomes you're after, the more success you're going to have in having a conversation or getting a response on email or setting a meeting. And so if you have a spreadsheet you can build to track things like what's the funding entity that I reached out to, what's the name of the person, contact information, when we met, what we discussed, and any next steps. And then, outcomes from meetings or engagement efforts over time, like, they invited us to submit a letter of intent, or they invited us to submit a formal proposal, or they said, not today, but in 2026, it's going to be a top priority. So come back and talk to us in 3 months. So again, don't over-engineer this, right? Just think about how can I get just a single document that would give me evidence, and every week or every couple of weeks or whatever your schedule allows, I'm able to invest 15 minutes, 20 minutes, updating the spreadsheet and taking the next step, right? I'm going to contact three new funders about getting a meeting or about checking out this new extension resource that I think would give them insights on food and agriculture based on extension research, or nutrition, or business. Again, just showing what you're doing and giving yourself evidence that you're making meaningful progress in building these relationships and starting to move toward a more resilient operating model, more financial sustainability, etc. And look, success builds incrementally, right? So this may all feel slow and tedious, and it's also possible to continue looking back and measuring your progress as you sort of keep a running record. And again, I know many of you are already very talented at record keeping. And so just ask yourself to sort of look for these area proof points that you're making progress, even if it in the moment doesn't feel like that. Okay, so the next question I want to ask this group, type into the chat, how many of you have been in a situation where you felt like trust just wasn't there? Type the number 1 into the chat if you've had that experience, either with a funder or with someone in a personal relationship. It was like they're saying all the right things, but I'm pretty sure the trust just isn't there. You know, maybe you could put a finger on it, maybe not. I see 1 yes in the chat. Okay, I see a few 1 coming in. So again, I suspect we've all had an experience with someone where we felt like the trust wasn't there. And so I want to say that, you know, this is like sort of Captain Obvious reporting, but you cannot control other people. This has been a very hard lesson as a parent, right? You can't control what your kids do. You can model good behaviors. You can validate their emotions. You can give, you know, examples of other maybe healthier choices they could be making. But ultimately, I cannot control my child. The same is true for adult relationships, right? I cannot control other people, but I can control how I show up, right? The mindset I have, the habits that I implement, and to the point of this slide, the professionalism that I model for those I really would love to work with. Notice I said work with, not work for, because I think working for a funder is probably an unhealthy example of that kind of relationship, as someone brought up in the chat a moment ago. So how do you do this, right? You can't control like the trust someone else feels. They have to sort of get there on their own. But you can control the behaviors that you engage in that make you trustworthy to work with, right? So being polite, right? Not being abrasive, not being aggressive in your outreach, whether it's phone calls or emails. Being curious, right? Asking, maybe just sending a very brief note that says, hey, I saw that you posted this funding opportunity. Could you clarify X? Or I work in my role in extension, I do X, Y, and Z. Would that be a good fit for submitting a proposal? Just again, planting the seed, making the connection, being curious, asking clarifying questions. Those are the kinds of things that build trust, that build relationships. You know, the second piece is really focus on customization. Coming from the marketing and communications background, how many of you, you can type into the chat or just, you know, throw a note in the chat that says like, are you ever contacted about marketing gimmicks, a new tool, a new consulting service, a new grant writer? Like, I suspect that most of us, I know like every day I typically get, I don't know, between 2 and 10 marketing messages trying to promote something really like snazzy to me. And it's very odd. In fact, sometimes the typeface is very obvious that they maybe customized my name, but everything else was just copy and paste, right? Everyone got the same exact message. I don't recommend doing that with funders, right? You know, think about ways to make something customized, right? Be personal. Study that organization before you start doing your outreach, right? Did they just award a major round of funding? Did they have a really great success story of a grantee that did something really tremendous that the New York Times or the you know, St. Louis Post-Dispatch covered, or whoever? And think about, you know, adding those things in that show you're paying attention, you're a student of the foundation or the other, you know, corporate entity, that you really do care beyond just, hey, let's get this done. I think we'd be great. Let's work together. And then finally, you know, designate a single point of contact, right? I know many of you in Extension work with colleagues, maybe work with other partner institutions or even community entities that you collaborate with on funding and implementation. So make sure that you're identifying a single point of contact. It might well be, you know, you on this call today. It might be someone you know that's really great with words or whatever the case might be. But give the funder a consistent point of contact. Give them consistency in knowing that you are dependable, reliable, that it's clear who they should talk to if they have questions, that you're available to answer anything they might need to know about. And again, really just think about empathy, right? How do I make sure that we're building humanity into this relationship? How do they know me and my colleagues? And how do we make ourselves available to share our expertise and really add value before we ever ask for anything in return? So let me take a pause and I'm going to get a drink of water. And I want to ask this group, what's one area that you'd like to explore to improve your ability to strike up conversations with prospective new funders? Maybe there's something you've done in the past that worked really well, but frankly, you haven't had time to try it again. Maybe there's, either via email or LinkedIn or another platform, like you feel like there's opportunity there if you made the investment. So talk to me about what's on your mind. What are you curious to explore as it relates to starting to make inroads with new funding partners? All right, I love it. Thank you for the comments. So I'm seeing more social media and in-person social events. Yes, absolutely. I think there's so much to be said for strategic use of social media, especially LinkedIn, where professionals hang out, and in person. Like you can't replace the value of face to face. I think especially um, one of my friends in the sort of nonprofit space, Eva Goldborn, runs a company called Littlefoot Ventures, and talks about the fact that a lot of funding entities are purposefully opaque, right? They don't publish a lot of information. So you really have to go searching. You have to ask the right questions, know the right people. And so uh, definitely like face to face is a way to get access in a way that oftentimes it can be difficult to do online. Um, Other comments I see here, Gwen said, read an article about using LinkedIn for this purpose, curious on the how. Definitely, maybe that's a topic for a future session, Gwen, but I love the idea. Direct messaging, just reaching out and making a connection request with no explanation can actually be a great way just to start building connections. And people, you might be surprised how many people on LinkedIn would accept a connection request without any sort of explanation that then can allow you to make the first outreach and say, hey, thanks so much for connecting. I'm Gwen, I'm Nate, and I do this. Great to hope to connect in the future. Whatever. Very informal. You're not making any ask at the outset. You're just building the connection, and it's sort of again a portfolio. It's like the modern business card with the added benefit that you can actually have an interaction. Kitty, confidence in representing the mission of my program. I love that. You're just getting that clarity, having those messages, and having confidence in the value that you're adding. So important. Matt says more examples of successful proposals, projects, and relationships. Yes, I love that. Amrita, social media and creating events with PR for them, getting news organizations to respond. Yes, love these. So actually, I'm gonna make some notes of these because I think these would be actually some really good topics for future conversations. So all of those things that you've described, I think, are really astute investments, areas to explore. And I know we won't tackle all of them today, but if there's some, I know we'll have some time toward the end for Q&A. So feel free to bring these back, right? And maybe we can get on the horn and just talk about these specifically. If there's a specific use case or opportunity you see, would love to visit more about that. Okay, so a few more thoughts here. And then, as Melanie said, we're going to go till about quarter after the hour. So in a little bit, we're going to drop in a couple of surveys, one from Extension Foundation, just to give some feedback on today's session. Want to make sure these are as valuable for you as possible. So when the time comes, please be sure to answer that survey. I'll have a separate survey just for my own benefit, just to get some insights from you on ways to improve in the future, what you liked or didn't. So that's secondary. Do Melanie's first. We'll probably do that closer to the top of the hour. So make every interaction meaningful. What I mean by this is find ways to really understand what funders want, right? Again, talk with others who've been funded. Check out if they have newsletters, resources, things of that nature. Understand, maybe look back at past RFPs or how they go about asking grantees to submit proposals, and understand like what are the criteria. Someone said earlier, one of the challenges of working with some funders is just the onerous amount of reporting. It's been my experience that in some cases foundations have less reporting than, say, the federal government. And so there could be some benefits, but you just don't know until you explore. Again, think about using AI, right? Using ChatGPT, Gemini, to actually say, go out and find me examples of RFPs that these specific foundations have issued in the past. Or maybe you don't have a specific name. You just say, find me examples of foundations that have funded work in food and ag or nutrition or whatever the case might be. And give me examples of like, what are some similarities, some common themes that you see in how these funders want their grantees to report back to them. And that might give you some clues that you could use in future conversations. Again, the middle box here, finding ways to add value, right? Sharing updates on the work you do in extension, recognizing when a funder, either makes an award or has an exciting announcement, or you saw a story that resonated with you and you thought of them. Again, it's empathy, it's thoughtfulness, it's professionalism. And then the final thing here that I put on the screen is, one and beyond, right? Nurturing relationships even after an initial meeting or project funding. Again, I can't say enough good things about a regular cadence of contact, right? It doesn't have to be a meeting. You don't need to clear your calendar and spend hours and hours every month just meeting with no purpose. But if you can balance sort of an occasional face-to-face check-in, either in person or virtually, with an email or sharing something, again, every little bit counts. And so find ways to maintain contact and remain on the radar, right? Remaining top of mind is really your goal. And ultimately doing that in a way that builds trust, that's authentic, that's real, because you care about these people as people, not just as people with money. There are several resources that I think can be helpful. And again, many of these may be familiar to this group. Sorry, let me jump back here. So in my research, these were some resources that I found particularly valuable that can help you as extension professionals sort of keep the pulse of the funding community beyond the government. So publications like the Chronicle of Philanthropy, Candide, the National Center for Family Philanthropy. So a lot of high net worth families that have family offices, they do some specific reports or have resources for high net worth families that may give you a sense of funding priorities, as high net worth families begin to sort of transition giving responsibilities to the next generation. So millennials, Gen Z, how are those younger generations thinking about funding compared to older generations? And vice versa, right? What can we learn from older generations who are making funding decisions right now? Again, these are the kinds of things I want to encourage you to think about. And then another one that came across my radar was Family Office Exchange. So in the slides that Melanie will share, you'll have links to each of these. And if you hover over this little computer, you can click on that and it'll open a new window in your browser. But again, just things to think about. And if you have other resources, please drop those into the chat. I would love to hear about those as well. Okay, so let me ask this question. What do you think is the hardest part about moving in the direction of adding a new funder or two to the work you do in extension? Like what is the number one barrier as you're thinking about all of this and saying, Nate, it sounds great to build these new relationships, or maybe I have a few active relationships that I'm cultivating, but it's really hard because X. What is the X factor? What is the part that makes it a struggle, do you think? All right, so I'm seeing several comments in here. Time, yes, absolutely. Like, where do I find the time to do these things, right? That can be a real challenge, and oftentimes it's the preeminent challenge, isn't it? So, to that I would say, every little bit counts, right? And that sounds trite and cliche, but it's absolutely true. If you invest the time to build that tracker I talked about, or even a simpler version where you're able to say, this is my top priority for this week. I'm going to do one thing. And if you can do that one thing really well, like I'm going to research 3 funders that might be a fit, that could be a great place to start. It might be, okay, I'm seeing other comments in here, finding staff who are able to participate. Yeah, so like finding people with the capacity to do the work. Navigating rules or compliance at the university, how funds can be used or administered. Yes. Melanie writes, a lot of people and organizations don't have awareness of extension in the work we do, right? So visibility, really sort of shortcutting a simple way to talk about who you are and what you do. Not having the guts to ask. Yes. Building confidence, right? So all of these things are areas to invest in. And again, pick one of these topics like building confidence or navigating complexity. Like, find a person or a resource like a book or a podcast or something to start educating yourself. Like, I would turn this into almost like an experimental model. Like, over the next 30 days, I'm just going to learn about this one thing, right? Maybe I'm going to try to learn more about the world of private foundations. Like, what do they care about? Who are they? Where are they located? Would they fund work like I do? If so, give me examples and really dig deeply into that. Again, it could be a podcast you're listening to on the way to work. It could be working with deep research in either, Gemini or ChatGPT to do the work for you, at least at a cursory level, and then dig deeper. But again, don't stress yourself out. Don't make this yet another project that requires hours in the week, but do something, right? And start building the knowledge that it will take to find the right people and tools to get you further ahead in this direction. Melanie, I know we have about 10 minutes left. We still have some material, and then we're going to move into Q&A. But if you're comfortable with it, Melanie, if you would go ahead and drop in that survey in the chat for Extension Foundation. I know some people may have to leave at the top of the hour, so I want to make sure they get a chance to respond. Thank you so much for doing that, Melanie. I appreciate it. So, building relationships, building partnerships for funding success, I would think about a couple of things, right? It may be that you as an extension professional feel like you have the skills, the time, the resources to go after most of this yourself, either exclusively or mostly. The more likely scenario, I suspect, is that you're probably going to be trying to collaborate, right? Either with people above you, people who are lateral to you, people in other extension offices, maybe other community organizations you partner with. I would start thinking about this as a team sport, right? Because yes, grants and funding are competitive, but the reality is we live in a world that's changing so fast every day. We have to trade notes, right? That doesn't mean you can't bring your own creative ideas. You can't be competitive and seek funding for yourself and your clients, because you absolutely should. But again, find a small team that is a support network, right? You share ideas, you think about specific funders, maybe you divvy up the work like, hey, I only have 30 minutes to dedicate to this funding partnership building work this week. I'm going to take 15 minutes doing this. Hey, buddy, could you spend 15 minutes doing that, right? And if you can't find a human buddy, then again, I keep harping on this, but AI can be a great strategy partner. Next, again, explore shared goals and brainstorm things that you as a partnership bring, right? So if you're going after funding jointly, document this, right? What do you both bring to the table? I think earlier this year or last year, we talked about sort of laying out a framework for these are the strengths we bring. This is the impact we deliver. This is how we do the work. And when you can sort of start connecting those dots, you're going to make a stronger case when you go out and reach out to funders, when you have those conversations, when you give them case studies or examples of things you could do together. You'll be much more cogent and clear if you've had some of those conversations behind closed doors before you go out and take that public. And then think about also opportunities to convene potential collaborators, right? Maybe there are groups you've really wanted to work with or other extension professionals you feel like would bring superpowers to a project, but you've never had the chance to have a conversation, right? Now would be the time to start convening just a brainstorming session or make a mastermind group and say, look, this group recognizes that what has gotten us to this point in our extension work isn't going to get us to the next level of impact. And in fact, the funding environment is more volatile than ever. And so now is the time for we as extension professionals to get together, compare notes, divvy up the work of research, starting to build inroads, thinking creatively, and again, leveraging tools and technologies that are our disposal, right? Whether that's experts in your network, whether that's AI or other kinds of technological tools. Again, think creatively, but start something, and ideally something with other people, because again, they're going to give you insights and expertise that you don't have, and vice versa. And then, one of the final pieces I would say is learn and persevere, right? So you as extension professionals are steeped in the expertise in your background, in education, and the importance of outreach and making complex concepts relatable and actionable. So again, think about what's working and also rejections that you've had, challenges, reflect on those barriers and possible solutions for overcoming them. No matter what, when you're meeting with a funder or engaging with them at any level, always thank them for their time and also for their expertise, right? You can't control other people. So when they volunteer the time, when they volunteer the expertise or walking you through the process, that deserves gratitude, right? And the same goes for you, right? My hope is that you'll find funders that are grateful to you for bringing new insights and perspectives to the table. You'll have evidence of the impact that you've delivered in ways that funders haven't previously thought about. A point from the previous slide that I failed to acknowledge is this idea of multidisciplinary thinking, right? So I come from the world of food and agriculture and specifically climate change, right? So climate is not just an issue that is in the earth sciences, right, or in agriculture, right? It spans disciplines, right, and it needs new kinds of thinking that sort of put the puzzle pieces together in different ways to create better outcomes than what we've had before. And funders appreciate that, right? Funders are thinking creatively, and they certainly have sort of values and purpose that they've defined. But my experience is that foundations and others are able to be maybe more nimble in adapting to the changing circumstances, right? Introducing new kinds of funding based on the evolving landscape, right? And so that's a tremendous opportunity for you as extension professionals to really plug in and support that creative process. And then, of course, always maintain professionalism, even if you feel like you've been burned or things were frustrating or you feel like you wasted time and got nowhere. Remind yourself you made the investment for the right reasons, right? You're moving toward a resilient mindset, a resilient operating system, sustainable funding for the long term. And so that's an investment worth savoring and appreciating, and it's not a waste. And again, this may also give you clues as to, hey, these are groups that we don't want to work with for these reasons. And that's okay too. Like, that's an insight that will pay dividends well into the future. So again, a common adage in sales, every no is a step closer to yes. It's absolutely true in the world of academia and nonprofits too, right? Setbacks can actually be opportunities to grow, even if it's extremely painful at the moment, and it very often is. All right. So here's a question to think about. If you feel brave and want to type it into the chat, awesome. If not, that's okay too. But think about what's something you could be doing in the extension community to support one another on the funding journey, right? So I mentioned several possibilities, creating a mastermind group, talking with a colleague that you've always wanted to visit with, rekindling old relationships, right? I think there's an opportunity here for everyone, and it may not be immediately apparent, but find that one thing and really just give it some time to think about. Let it percolate. Yeah, Chase, I think that's exactly right, right? If you don't ask, the answer will always be no. So always lean on the side of asking, and obviously doing so in a professional way. So as we wrap up and move into our Q&A session, think about ways to take action, right? Invest time in those relationships toward that idea of more sustainable funding. Align your outreach with funders' goals and preferences, obviously in a way that's authentic to the work that Extension does, that doesn't go against your values, but that's fully in line with that. And again, collaborate boldly, ask, as the point was made earlier by Chase, learn from every experience and even setbacks, right? There is something to be said for the extension professionals I know, and I've worked with a lot of them, are resilient. They take a bruising sometimes, but they keep going because they know that how important the work is. They know the impact that's being delivered. They recognize that extension is unique in its scope, in its mission, in its makeup of expertise and talent, in a way that if extension doesn't do this work, then name the entity that's going to step into the gap and fill that. You probably can't think of one, right? So your work does matter, and there are real opportunities out there. And so I hope this has been helpful to you in sort of thinking about what the possibilities might be. So I hope you've taken the time. If you want to go ahead, please first answer the extension survey. If you don't mind scanning this QR code or typing this into your browser and giving me some feedback, I would appreciate it. Now we're going to move into Q&A, and I would love to hear from this group about specific questions or opportunities that you see on the horizon, right? Maybe it's a challenge that you're facing when it comes to sort of making these kinds of inroads. I know several barriers were mentioned earlier, so would love to maybe revisit some of those with this group. So what's on your mind? Where would you like to go? What questions can we talk about together that might be beneficial to this entire group? And while I'm waiting for the bold souls who want to type a question in, I will take a drink. I see that there were several ideas about ways extension could support each other. I love the idea of Larissa collaborating and passing on information that benefits others. Totally, right? There are lots of times where I see an opportunity, it's like, that's not really my sweet spot. But boy, I bet there are people out there who could use it, right? Connect Extension is a tremendous platform for sharing those kinds of ideas and opportunities. So leverage those kinds of in-house tools and resources where extension professionals already are hanging out. That's an awesome resource to leverage. Gwen says share grant writing tips, tricks, tools with each other. Yes, absolutely, right? Um, and leverage people like me and other professionals that are partnering with Extension, right? One of my roles is to just help people get creative in their thinking, to access new kinds of tools and resources. So definitely leverage. Again, you don't have to invest any sort of funding to get a lot of value immediately. So Eric says sharing relevant funding information or sharing relevant funding organizations. Eric, if you're still with us, would you mind sharing a little bit more about that topic or that question, something that you're curious about?
Yeah, thanks, Nate. I just would be interested to hear what other kind of funding organizations my counterparts in the other states and universities are going after relevant to extension work.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Eric. I love that. So I would love for this group, if you have had success um, building relationships or finding funding with non-government sources, whether that's private foundations, family offices, corporations, would love for someone to either come off mute and share that example or type it in the chat. So I'm just to take a pause here and see if someone out there would be willing to share an example for us. And if you don't, that's okay, right? Probably some of the reason we're here is that we're trying to learn. I will say, Eric, that one example that was shared, I can't remember, Melanie might be able to remind me if it was last month or the month before. But we had an extension professional named Jerry Bratz from the University of Wisconsin Extension who talked about, I mean, and again, he's been doing this for many years, but one of the things he shared on that webinar, which we should have a recording of, is several different examples of times when he's walked into, local banks, for example, or, going into a, local organization where, he explained, like, here's what we do at Extension. We're trying to secure funding for these activities, for this outcome, either for youth or for other people in the community. And very quickly, people said yes, right? And a lot of it was just about experience, trial and error, trying things again and again. So there are definitely, I know, folks out there who've been doing this successfully. And it's a really good question. I think Larissa's point is following up is really true, right? Just because someone says, I don't have funding today or I'm not interested, go back and be intentional, right? And part of this, I think, again, goes back to the idea of erring on the side of sharing value, right? So in your state, in your region, whether it's the Midwest or the Northeast, there are likely foundations. I use a tool called Instrumental, which is a grants research tool. It's a paid subscription, but there are other tools out there, Grantable, for example, and many others that are either free or low cost, where you can go and sort of look up examples and filter it by category, right? So I'm looking for funding for agriculture, or I'm looking for funding at the level of $1 million or more. I'm looking at funding for the county where I live and work. And you can dial it in very specifically in many cases. So I would just encourage you to spend a little time with that and start familiarizing yourself with some of those institutions. And then once you've sort of checked out their website, maybe identified a person or two who works there, then I would suggest, figure out, are there any sort of new, I'm thinking as a journalist, so are there any news hooks I can sort of gravitate toward that would help me open the door to a conversation? So maybe they issued a news release about a new funding round. Maybe there was a news report you saw where, in Googling the name of this foundation, I see this grantee had a lot of really good success. So maybe it's a note to the executive director or a program officer that says, hey, I was really intrigued by this program. I wondered if we could get on a call for 5 minutes so you could tell me a little bit more about the kinds of work you fund. Or maybe there are some helpful resources you've published already you could point me to. So I think just finding opportunities for inroads, and again, being creative, right? I think if you have hesitancy because you're afraid that your university would be so bogged down in paperwork or do this, not that, first I would sort of get familiar with, talk to whoever in finance or, philanthropy or whoever in your university sort of has those guideposts as to what's acceptable or unacceptable. Use that to really familiarize yourself and then say, and I have specific questions ready, like, so can I go to corporations? Can I go talk to nonprofits? Can I go talk to individuals who may want to give? really understand what the guardrails are, and so that you are confident when you can start maybe making some of that outreach. So even though you don't have a specific example of, let's say, an extension professional going into their local hospital system, for example, and asking for funding, you have confidence because of the research you've done, or just because you're working on being bolder. You want to have conversations with the hospital director about, like, could we work more strategically together? Like, is there funding available for this kind of thing? So I would say that it's always great to have past examples of performance and success, but don't let the past totally guide your decision making and thought process. Really, I would challenge you to think outside the box, and just see what's possible. Right? Ask questions. Like, be unashamed. Insofar as you're remaining professional and you are understanding the guardrails, right? It would be sad to go after funding that it turns out, like, your university says, sorry, that's a no-go for these reasons, right? And that may happen no matter whatever planning you invest. But I think the more you do to quickly upskill yourself and find the person who can give you the play-by-play as to what's okay and not okay, then you can start doing your homework, and then you can start maybe opening some of those doors to conversations with funders. I hope that's helpful. Melanie writes, what I've heard from extension professionals in other sessions include local banks, United Way, Giving Day campaigns, mills and lumber companies, Drug Prevention Coalition, food production research funds, credit union, local health district. That's awesome, Melanie. That's a great list. And those are many examples I never even considered. So I'm really delighted you're here and sharing what you've heard in other sessions. That's super helpful and instructive. So again, I mean, the sky is really the limit, right? There are always, guardrails, but think outside the box, and I think you might be surprised at what happens. Local banks come up a lot. Yes, I've heard that. Absolutely, Melanie. Great point. Chase says it could be a good time to reach out to federal employees on LinkedIn who suddenly have time on their hands, not to ask for money, but to share support for the mission, maybe brainstorm relevant concepts. All of the posts I've seen share an extreme dedication to public service and their work. Yeah, I think that's a really great point. So if you're on, and I'm going to go ahead and advance the slide here as we have about 7 minutes left or so. So you can see our session next month and start planning accordingly. Chase, you raise a really great point. Like, there are a lot of folks there who are going through very hard times right now, and they're probably as or even more passionate about the mission than they were before. And so if there are opportunities to brainstorm, as Chase says, to think about ways to support them, to leverage their expertise, to think about future ways to collaborate. Again, just because some of the people are paused or, in the worst case scenario, laid off, doesn't mean that there aren't opportunities to sort of start thinking about what comes next. Like, how do we keep making an impact? How do we get you into a better place to be able to support this? Again, there are probably lots of folks, many, if not everyone here, has collaborated with, and you don't want to lose that, right? You've built that rapport, you've built that trust, and in many cases, friendships. And so finding ways to continue adding value, and again, tapping into that expertise and that passion, I think, could be so powerful and really support people who are going through challenging times. I really think that's a powerful idea. All right, we have about 5 minutes left. Are there any other questions or topics that anyone would like to share or address in this group today? And again, I've been keeping notes of other topics that have come up, because I think some of these barriers you identified or examples of things you'd like to try would make great topics for future conversations that we probably don't have time to dig into today. All right. I'm not seeing any more questions. That's totally okay. Yeah, you bet, Eric. Thanks for being here. Julio, go ahead, please. Excuse me.
Yeah, no worries, Julio. Yes, mine. I was wondering. So we've gotten like federal funding and like large project funding, and sometimes just like some extra materials, right, or like just some extra, like an extra like 10,000, 15,000 would really help like expand the project. And so, what's that relationship like? Like, to reach out to a company or reach out to a smaller group for just those kinds of funding. Us being a nonprofit, right? Extension being a nonprofit, and possibly being able to like provide a tax ID. Because that's oftentimes what I find is like we have funding for staff or like for some things, but then the funding is very strict on what we could spend it on, and so kind of that flexible funding. Yeah. So do you have any experience with that, or any recommendations on like reaching out to Yeah, to businesses or for smaller grants, smaller projects?
Yeah, Julio, great question. Thank you for that. You raise a really great point that finding that sort of discretionary dollars to be able to fill in the gaps and, like you said, sort of take the program to the next level of excellence can be really important. And I think going back to that session that I mentioned earlier, and again, we'll try to, Melanie, I'll follow up with you after. We'll try to find a link to the recording of that session with Jerry. I think that would be a great place to start, Julio, is just listen to some of Jerry's examples and then maybe even reach out to him directly just to pick his brain a little bit. There are some others on this call today, I know in the Zoom chat, who've given some other examples that might be a good resource. But based on the stories that I've heard and my own, experience working with clients in this space, it seems like the kinds of requests you're talking about, $2,000, $5,000, $10,000, companies, the bank example that Melanie and others raised earlier, local institutions that give back to their community that are active on, local boards, they volunteer, they give back to youth and students, those are the kind I would sort of maybe create some personas of like, just think about your own local community and think about what are the institutions that really are engaged, right? I see their advertising and banners at all the community events, right? Our county fair or local festivals or those kinds of things. I hear them giving scholarships. I hear that they're doing, like, they care about these issues, whether that's like, improving your personal finances or environmental issues. I would say sort of make a short list just based on your own lived experience in your community, like who is everywhere, like who's ubiquitous, and then start to think about, okay, if I were going to them, like, what do I think of the work that I'm doing? What seems to line up with this specific organization's priorities, right? And maybe if it doesn't line up one-to-one, like maybe you're doing something in agriculture, but they focus on personal finance, there may be connections that you don't even see yet. And Chase raises a great point too in the chat here. Finding out their fiscal year timeline can be helpful. You may be more likely to get funded or on the list of recipients at the beginning of year than at the end. Yes, so it's a really great point, right? Sometimes you'll approach a funder, even in the corporate world, and they'll say, hey, this is off cycle, like we've already dedicated all of our funds this year, but come back to me in 3 months and let's talk about our new fiscal year. So Chase raises a great point, right? The sooner you can sort of make that short list of community entities, identify specific needs, and then start figuring out specific asks, I think you might be surprised. Like, it seems to me as though those sort of entities often have more flexibility to make funding decisions faster, especially at a certain threshold. And I also wouldn't be afraid to ask, like, what is your funding threshold, right? What is your turnaround time, right? If I were to ask for this level of funding, what is the approval process like? Does it have to go to your board? Do you get to sign off personally? Like, what documentation would you need? What letters of support or other kinds of things like that? Like, get a list and build essentially like a standard operating procedure document that you can start building for each of these organizations that you want to go after funding with. Because again, some may be able to give funding pretty rapidly for, let's say below $5,000, but above that, there may be a much more rigorous review process. So the sooner you can understand some of those nuances, the more effective strategy you can put together for finding those smaller dollar awards that are going to help take you to the next level. That's a really great question, Julio. And I hope that was helpful. Chase, those insights were super valuable. Thank you for sharing that. Awesome. All right. Well, I think we're about at time. We have 2 minutes left. So I'm going to, yeah, Chase, I think you're right. I see in the chat, beginning the conversation could just be to ask about their process. Right. So, at Extension, we're always looking for opportunities to add value back to our community. That requires funding. We have grant funding. We have funding from the university. And there are always needs beyond that. Is this the sort of thing you fund? And if so, what is the process like? So Chase, great observation. I think that'd be a great first step to take. All right. Well, I know we're at time. I want to say thank you so much to all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here. I hope you found something of value here. I want to say thank you to Melanie and Extension Foundation for making this possible and through the NTAE program. And next month, as you'll see here on your screen, we're going to be talking about structuring effective proposals, right? Once you've started to build those relationships, you have the opportunity to really dial in existing proposals or brand new ones. How do you start to do that in a way that's really going to grab attention and be effective? Again, I think there are some new ways we can start thinking about this that's going to add value to funders and going to make you compelling for why you are best suited to do that work that delivers that kind of impact. I also want to say that I've heard from at least one person within Extension that they'd like more insights on how to take proposals that maybe didn't get funded or are on the shelf and retool those for funding, right? So you're not having to rework everything from scratch. I would love it if this group could bring some examples or some vignettes of those kinds of programs, and maybe we could workshop that a little bit in real time together live at our next session on May 15th. So think about that. Come prepared to discuss. And again, thank you all so much. Have a great day and continued best wishes on your efforts and funding. I look forward to hearing your success stories.
Thanks everyone for your engagement, and we will see you next time. Have a great rest of your Thursday.